Not done with her, Yvonne Roberts took her time with her makeup, applying it carefully and meticulously. No amount of foundation could fully hide her freckles, but she could at least smooth out her complexion and reduce the uneven, pale look of her skin. Her hair transformation had been completed the day before, courtesy of her considerate husband, Brian. He had treated her to an appointment at T. Dayton's, an upscale salon in Bender, Louisiana. Celebrating their 10-year reunion, he had quipped, "Hey, 10 years reunion only happens once every decade, right?" With his affectionate embrace, he reassured her, "You're worth every bit of it." Reflecting on the salon visit, Yvonne admired the work done by Marlene, the stylist. Her dull, orange hair was revitalized with bounce and subtly highlighted with blonde streaks, giving it a lighter, more vibrant appearance. After finishing her makeup, Yvonne turned her attention to her attire, selecting a garment as per Roy's suggestion. She had chosen a sophisticated black ensemble from Babbage, a high-end store in Bender. The outfit was complemented by elegant undergarments that she had typically avoided, despite Brian's preference for them. She dressed cautiously in a black dress that was short but appropriate, mindful of her petite height. Alone at home, she reassured herself, minimizing the need for concern over her dress length. Yvonne hesitantly considered wearing stockings, an item Brian often suggested, which she had previously dismissed. However, upon seeing the flattering effect they had on her legs in the mirror, she began to appreciate their appeal. She slipped into her 4-inch black patent leather pumps, the ones she had chosen for the reunion. These heels, paired with the smoke gray dress she selected for the event, created the perfect ensemble. As she checked her reflection in the full-length mirror, she noticed the added height the 4-inch heels provided. She couldn't help but smirk, thinking about Roy Richardson, who was a towering 6'3". Standing next to him, she felt she would need stilts to match his height. Her husband Brian, standing at 5'7", would find her closer to his height in these shoes. He had expressed excitement about dancing with her at the reunion. Yvonne picked up her purse, double-checking she had everything needed for the evening. Exiting her bedroom, she heard Julia, their neighbor and occasional babysitter, reading nursery rhymes to Delilah, their cherished daughter. "Wow, Mrs. Roberts, you look nice," Julia exclaimed. "Thank you, dear," Yvonne replied, with a hint of detachment, as she noticed Julia's untidy appearance and youthful complexion. Yvonne remembered Julia's story about her name's origin, inspired by her father's admiration for Julia Roberts in Pretty Woman. However, Julia Nichol shared little in common with the famed actress in terms of appearance. Recalling a light-hearted comment from the past, Julia had once joked about marrying Mr. Brian to adopt the Roberts surname. Yvonne had laughed, while Brian had responded with a kind smile as he paid the babysitter. Yvonne mentioned she would return before their sons, Buddy and Connor, arrived home. "If I'm delayed," she instructed Julia, "there are snacks in the pantry they can have, along with a glass of milk." "Yes, ma'am," Julia responded with a smile, her youthful innocence shining through. Yvonne left the house, intentionally avoiding a goodbye to her daughter. She didn't want the child's messy hands ruining her clothes. Climbing into her minivan, she frowned deeply, muttering about the luxurious cars she could have owned had she married someone else, like Roy Richardson. Yvonne Davidson, not particularly slender and struggling with her skin, had longed for Roy back in their school days at Kimball Academy. Roy, the charming athlete, was popular yet kind, always welcoming to newcomers. Back then, Yvonne, heavier and battling severe skin issues, could only dream about being someone like Wendy Marshall, Roy's girlfriend. When Brian Roberts, a kind-hearted but similarly awkward classmate, asked her to the homecoming dance, she hesitantly accepted. They ended up having a modest date, borrowing his uncle's car and dining out before attending the dance. Years later, a photo from that night still hung on Brian's keychain, next to family pictures. Their evening ended awkwardly behind the stadium, a common hangout spot, where misunderstandings and insecurities briefly surfaced between them. "No, Yvonne, I think you're the most beautiful girl at Kimball," Brian insisted. "Your eyes are absolutely stunning." After parking, they shared a passionate kiss, and Brian daringly caressed Yvonne's shoulder until Officer Dan Nguyen tapped on the car window, urging them to head home. "Yes, sir," Brian replied, visibly nervous. At Yvonne's place, laughter took over as they reflected on their evening. From that day, they became inseparable. "Hey Brian," Dean Danatoro, a school athlete, sneered. "Did you two spend your time comparing freckles?" Brian, unable to contain his anger, punched Dean, leading to Coach Nunez intervening and preventing any further escalation. No one dared to tease Yvonne after that. Yvonne, however, remained infatuated with others like Roy Richardson and Chad Wellesley. Post-spring prom, Yvonne convinced Brian to take her to the Acadiana Motel. She had been following a strict diet, losing weight, and eating healthier, which improved her skin condition. "You brought protection, right?" she inquired as they arrived at the budget motel on Highway 19. "Of course, I've got it," Brian confirmed, showing her a pack. They checked into room 102, and Yvonne disappeared into the bathroom. Meanwhile, Brian turned on the TV, which offered a variety of channels. The receptionist had mentioned the adult entertainment options. "Look at all these different channels," Brian muttered to himself. "What are you muttering about?" Yvonne called from the bathroom. "Just checking out the TV options," Brian replied as he continued to explore the selections. The television displayed a very slender girl with unnatural enhancements being treated roughly in a scene. The next scene didn't improve, and Brian changed the channel to something less intense. "Hey, lover," Yvonne announced as she entered the room. Brian turned, saw Yvonne in her state of undress, and had an uncontrollable reaction, marking the wall next to the television. Yvonne noticed Brian's less than appealing physique and his embarrassing lack of composure. She felt the urge to leave immediately, get dressed, and ask Brian to take her home. However, she exhaled, approached the now regretful Brian, embraced him warmly, and initiated a tender kiss. "There's something I've always been curious about." Brian hesitated as they sat together on the bed. "What is it?" Yvonne inquired, feeling anxious. At the prom, Yvonne overheard Wendy and Tiffany in the bathroom, discussing Roy's unusual request and how he had been persuading Wendy. "So, will you agree to it?" Tiffany probed. "No way," Wendy exclaimed. "Mariella tried it with Dean and it ended badly for her." Yvonne, thinking to herself in the restroom, felt differently but kept it to herself. When Wendy and Tiffany noticed it was just Yvonne Davidson, they disregarded her presence and resumed their mockery of Mariella's unfortunate experience. Yvonne left the bathroom, silently fuming at their cruelty and dismissing their scorn. In her thoughts, Yvonne considered the idea more openly than she would admit, even contemplating if circumstances were different. But now, in the motel room with Brian Roberts, Yvonne knew she wouldn't consent to something she found disrespectful and potentially hurtful with him. Brian laid Yvonne back on the modest mattress, tenderly kissing her lips before moving to the nape of her neck. He knew her shoulders were a spot she found particularly comforting, so he lightly nibbled across them, eliciting a content sigh from Yvonne. As he continued with gentle caresses, she found the sensations enjoyable. However, when Brian's touch moved to her stomach, Yvonne's enjoyment began to wane. Previously, his actions had been pleasurable, but she felt self-conscious about her body. The intimate moment between them intensified, with Yvonne experiencing a surge of overwhelming emotions. Brian's attentiveness brought her to a state of bliss multiple times before they proceeded further with caution and sensitivity. Yvonne had apprehensions about intimacy, influenced by daunting tales, but the experience was one of mild discomfort followed by a deep connection. Their night continued with moments of intensity and tenderness until Yvonne expressed a desire to return home, pondering future romantic possibilities in her reflective state. Despite her efforts to maintain her fitness, Yvonne faced challenges with her self-image, leading to moments of frustration and harsh words directed at Brian. Yet, amidst the complexities of their relationship and Yvonne's personal struggles, Brian remained committed, embodying a sense of responsibility and care. Brian's life took a demanding turn as he embarked on a rigorous career path with Bowman Engineering, determined to build a stable and fulfilling life for them, reflecting his dedication and perseverance through challenging circumstances. One day, 4 months into his job at Bowman and 7 months into Yvonne's pregnancy, a pump malfunctioned. The Roughnecks were content since the broken pump meant they got paid just to hang out and joke around. Kendrick's Engineering informed Shorty, the towering foreman, that it would take several hours before a technician could arrive. Their main mechanic was occupied on another platform. "May I try fixing it?" Brian inquired of Shorty. Though ahead, Shorty responded indifferently. Then he leaned in and quietly told Brian, "If you manage to fix it, you'll be the hero of the day." Brian removed the cover, inspected, adjusted a few things, and then nodded confidently. "We need a number 9 flange and a 1/4-inch spring," he murmured to Shorty after reassembling it. Once Shorty relayed the message, Kendricks ensured the mechanic would have the necessary parts. Brian was then taken off the rig as Shorty pointed him out to the Kendricks technician. Kendricks Engineering offered Brian a better pay rate than Bowman and even sponsored his training. Brian Jr., affectionately nicknamed Buddy by both families, was a healthy newborn boy. Yvonne, as soon as she could, started a rigorous fitness and diet regimen. She was doing well, toning her body and gradually stopping breastfeeding. "Wow, honey, you look amazing," Brian complimented Yvonne as she looked at herself in the mirror. Yvonne responded with a smile to the praise. "You're looking pretty good yourself," she said. And Brian did look good. The hard work had helped him shed the extra weight, proving that physical labor is effective for getting in shape. His appearance had improved significantly, with a neat buzz cut, clearer skin, and more fashionable glasses. 2 months on, Yvonne was not pleased when Dr. Farbacher confirmed her pregnancy. Post Connor's birth, she considered weight loss surgery, but the doctor advised against it, suggesting diet and exercise instead. Yvonne was irked upon hearing Brian express how attractive he found her during pregnancy, leading to a strained period in their intimacy. She pushed for discussions on permanent birth control solutions. Yet, before any decision was made, they were surprised by another contraceptive failure, causing Yvonne to express her frustration loudly. Despite Brian's concerns about her weight loss and appearance, he remained silent. Years later, after their second child, Yvonne still fought with the last bit of weight gain, which she found appealing in certain areas. With their high school reunion looming, she became fixated on shedding these pounds, yet her efforts seemed futile. Ignoring her exercise routine one day, Yvonne created a Facebook account while Delilah napped and reconnected with Roy Richardson, a charismatic former classmate. He was generous with his compliments towards her, their family, and her appearance. Yvonne was browsing through Brian's photos and stumbled upon a picture of herself in a black nightgown, taken around the time they had their daughter Delilah. She decided to share the image online. "Wow, you're stunning," Roy commented. Over the following 2 months, they frequently chatted online. Yvonne learned that Roy Richardson, a resident of Oakleaf, Texas, and a police officer, was single. "After my Marine service, policing felt right," Roy shared. He had separated from Wendy after enlisting. She had moved on with a football player from Conley College in Oakleaf. Roy mentioned he had 4 children and joked about Wendy's change in appearance, noting she had gained weight. His social media showed a photo of Roy, Wendy, and her new husband, a fellow officer. Yvonne felt a hint of triumph seeing Wendy's transformation. They both looked forward to an upcoming reunion and reconnecting with friends. Yvonne's hint at meeting up before the event was initially met with silence, causing her some annoyance and resentment towards Brian and Delilah for her weight gain. Dean Danatoro and John Taylor, from her social media circle, quickly suggested private meetups, with Dean proposing a hotel and John his lake house. But Roy seemed reluctant, surprising Brian with his distant behavior. Eventually, Roy apologized for missing Yvonne's message and expressed eagerness to meet, asking her to wear something black for their reunion. In subsequent conversations, Roy's hints about their private meeting became more forward and suggestive. Yvonne hesitated before speaking. She was never keen on the idea of intimate oral moments, finding them somewhat unpleasant due to the effort and sensation involved. Such encounters with Brian typically occurred when she had indulged in too much alcohol. "This is a special occasion," she remarked playfully to Roy. Her prior experiences with more adventurous intimacy were limited and not particularly comfortable, but she found a surprising pleasure in the subtle explorations during their moments together. She anticipated that the new step with Roy might be equally intriguing. Roy then peculiarly specified that she bring exactly 5 condoms. This was an odd request that risked Brian noticing a reduction in their shared supply, which they usually purchased in packs of 12. Yvonne had been increasingly restricting Brian's physical access to her. To solve this, she bought a pack of 6 condoms, discreetly disposed of one along with the packaging, camouflaging it amidst kitchen refuse. She wondered about their frequent egg consumption. The delicate fabric of her thong irritated her skin, which Yvonne found bothersome, yet she endured it for Roy. She had seen his recent photo in uniform on his social media, which had rekindled her attraction. Roy had matured into a more striking appearance since their school days. Upon her arrival at the Acadiana Motel, Roy greeted her warmly in room 102 with a friendly hug and a polite peck on the cheek, which Yvonne impulsively turned into a passionate kiss. Hey, take it easy," Roy chuckled, shutting the door behind them. He commented on her attire, acknowledging the black color with a glance. Yvonne, with a burst of excitement, showed off her carefully chosen lingerie, expecting a more passionate reaction. She was puzzled by his reserved demeanor, having anticipated a more fervent response to her effort. "They should at least be sharing a passionate embrace, their closeness evident," Roy said as Yvonne approached the table. "Right here, partner," she responded with a smile, showing a packet. "Yeah, come on," Roy spoke into his phone. Shortly after, a knock on the motel door interrupted them. "What? Who's?" Yvonne started, confused, as Roy exhaled deeply and stood up. Opening the door, he allowed a young man to enter the room. "What? We're not," Yvonne stuttered. "Yvonne Roberts, you've been served," announced Richard Boudreau gravely, handing her a large envelope. "You remember, back in school, you all voted me most friendliest." Roy reminisced, sitting back down. Yvonne shrieked upon realizing the envelope contained her marriage dissolution papers. "Drove Miss Eggleston crazy," Roy mused, recalling their English teacher's insistence on grammatical correctness. "Why does he want a divorce?" Yvonne shrieked in disbelief. "Adultery," Roy stated. "But we didn't," Yvonne protested. "No, but you were about to, Yvonne," Roy interjected softly. "The way you greeted me at the door, followed my dress code, brought what I asked for. It all suggests intent. But nothing happened," Yvonne exclaimed, tears streaming down her face. Roy continued, "You seem to have forgotten who lived next door to me growing up. Brian Roberts, my childhood best friend. Without him, I'd have never passed algebra. But we didn't," Yvonne insisted, her voice trailing off. "And you know what? Friends shouldn't do that to each other," Roy remarked. "Friends don't betray each other by getting involved with their friends' spouses, no matter the temptation." Roy stood up and walked toward the door. "Recognize this place?" he inquired. Yvonne remained silent. "It's the same room you and Brian shared for your first intimate moment," Roy pointed out. Yvonne slowly surveyed the room. Roy opened the door. "You sent the let's catch up message, and I reached out to Brian," Roy confessed. "Nearly shattered him, you know." Roy exited through the door. "I gave you every chance to back out, to say you had second thoughts, that your love for your husband was too strong," Roy commented as he lit a cigar. He laughed softly. "Isn't that something?" They fuss about the mess but overlook the smoke in their rooms. Anyway, see you at the reunion, right? Roy said, strolling away. 20 minutes later, a woman knocked on the door. Roy had left it ajar, yet the woman paused to knock before entering. Are you done? I'm here to clean, the woman with a Latin accent mentioned. Yvonne, without a word, stood up and exited the dingy room. Arriving home, she noticed Brian's truck in the driveway, irked that he had taken her preferred parking spot. Brian, she yelled as she burst into the house. I'll be gone shortly, her husband responded, busy packing some clothes. She noticed his teary eyes, reddened from crying. What is all this about? She demanded, brandishing some papers at him. It's quite clear, Brian said, his voice tense. I'm filing for divorce. You can pursue a relationship with Roy, Dean, or anyone you choose. Shortly after, he was at the door, carrying 2 suitcases. Unbeknownst to Yvonne, Brian had selected the inexpensive suitcases, a wedding gift from an uncle. During their last vacation, Yvonne had expressed her embarrassment over those unattractive things, prompting Brian to purchase more elegant ones. 5 hours post Brian's silent departure, Yvonne hadn't prepared for the reunion. She didn't bother with her elegant gray dress or matching hose, instead sitting at her kitchen table, oscillating between self-pity and intense frustration. It was past 8 in the evening when she noticed Buddy, Connor, and Delilah were absent. Where are my children? She yelled into the phone upon hearing Brian's upbeat voicemail. They're with your mother, Brian texted back. She's watching them for our reunion, remember. Time elapsed, and Yvonne's mother strongly recommended she hire a lawyer, not to halt the divorce but to secure some benefits. No, the divorce won't stop, but you should at least get something from it, her mother advised, disappointment evident in her tone. Yvonne, feeling indignant yet empowered, eventually met with attorney Parker Johnson, who assured her of expediting the process. You have a household and children to manage, he noted. Exactly, Yvonne concurred. In Judge Marie Rabichak's courtroom, Yvonne sat confidently, backed by her assertive lawyer who was determined to secure a substantial sum from Brian for child support, possibly $500 to $600 per child, and a hefty alimony of at least $1,000 monthly, on top of covering their 3-bedroom home's mortgage. He'll be stuck with basic meals for the next 15 years, Parker informed the woman. Why only 15 years? Yvonne chuckled. It's until Delilah becomes an adult, Parker explained. Yvonne glanced over as Parker suddenly muttered in annoyance. She followed his gaze as her husband arrived, accompanied by a distinguished, slightly older black gentleman. Donald Pellicet, Parker grumbled. Out of everyone, he had to be the one. Despite his earlier confidence, Parker could only manage frustrated protest, as Donald Pellicet thoroughly and systematically presented Yvonne's activities during the high school reunion. Is there more to it? Yvonne inquired, after Judge Marie Rabichak decided that Mrs. Roberts would keep primary custody of the 3 children, with generous visitation for Brian Roberts, and that Yvonne Roberts would get $750 a month, $250 for each child. Yvonne turned to Parker Johnson and raised her voice. What about my alimony? Mrs. Roberts, this court does not reward unfaithful behavior, Judge Rabichak declared, sternly looking at her. But how will I manage? My mortgage alone is $800 a month, Yvonne protested. Your lawyer should remind you that the marital home and all assets are to be sold, with the proceeds divided equally, Judge Rabichak interrupted. But I was supposed to keep the house, right? Yvonne asked, her complexion turning even paler. Things were not unfolding as she had anticipated. Her lawyer had led her to believe she would receive everything. It was not going as planned. Roy Richardson was meant to be captivated by her, overcome with desire, and swept away in a whirlwind of romance. He was then supposed to realize that he had never truly loved anyone as much as he loved Yvonne. No, you never contributed financially to the marriage, Parker whispered bitterly. But what will I do? Where will I live? Yvonne exclaimed, visibly upset with Brian Roberts. Mrs. Roberts, may I offer a piece of advice? Judge Rabichak interjected. Find employment. May I offer a piece of advice? Yvonne cried out, clearly incensed. Be cautious, Mrs. Roberts, Marie cautioned. Stop, Parker also interjected. When Carmen Davis, the real estate agent, first brought potential buyers to view the house, Yvonne could only smirk, seeing the place in disarray. Then Parker phoned Yvonne. Look, Mrs. Roberts, he said sharply. Tidy up the house, make it presentable, and sell it. Continue with your antics, and you're losing money, understand? The sale of the house will proceed, regardless of your feelings. He reminded her that talking to him cost $400 each time before abruptly ending the call. But where will I live? Yvonne cried despairingly. Dressed neatly, Yvonne then contacted Julia. I can't, Julia responded, her voice shaky, declining to look after Delilah. You haven't settled your dues for the last 2 occasions. Recall. Realizing that Brian had transferred the child support, Yvonne phoned Julia again, promising to pay her double, plus the outstanding amount. The young woman reluctantly agreed. The local employment agency assisted Yvonne in filling out job applications and creating resumes. The process lasted about 3 hours, leaving Yvonne drained. I'd prefer cash, Julia stated when Yvonne started to write a check. Reluctantly, Yvonne paid her in cash. Caught up in her own troubles, Yvonne failed to notice the subtle changes in the young girl, how her appearance was improving. A review of her emails revealed a rejection from St. Elizabeth's Public Utilities. They had declined her application, albeit politely. Meanwhile, King Sanitation offered a glimmer of hope, noting they would retain her application and get in touch if a position became available. "No, honey, I'm in a 2-bedroom condo," Yvonne's mother responded sharply when Yvonne suggested moving in with her. "But it's just until I can." Yvonne started to plead. "Yvonne, when are you going to take responsibility?" Her mother interrupted. "It's been 3 or 4 months since your escapade. You've had ample time to sort yourself out." Then Brian called, reminding her of her obligation to contribute to the education expenses of their children, Buddy and Connor, including their uniforms. "How much do I owe, then?" Yvonne exclaimed in frustration. Brian continued, mentioning he was changing his mobile plan and that she would need to make her own arrangements if she wanted to keep her phone service. Yvonne felt overwhelmed, as if she was about to explode. "And I've heard from Prentice you've missed the last 2 car payments," Brian inquired. Brian hadn't accompanied her when she purchased the minivan at Prentice Chevrolet, so his name wasn't on the contract. "Brian, where should I go?" Yvonne implored, her situation growing increasingly desperate. "I don't have." "Well, you could try reaching out to Roy, or Dean, or any of the others," Brian retorted sarcastically. She did reach out to Dean, who had shown keen interest in reconnecting. "Really, they're genuine," Dean remarked, unable to take his eyes off her. "Mind your language," Yvonne snapped back, aware that Delilah was nearby. Dean had left abruptly, not giving Yvonne time to gather her things. John Taylor lingered a bit longer, entertaining Delilah with his playful antics. "Let's hurry before Melissa returns," John suggested, making an awkward move. "Melissa, who's that?" inquired Yvonne, momentarily confused. "Oh, my wife, Melissa Thibodeaux. We've been together since school," John awkwardly confessed. In an instant, Yvonne and Delilah had disappeared, leaving John in a bewildered state. Carmen informed Yvonne about an offer received for her house. Yvonne responded unenthusiastically, though the house sale eventually added $12,000 to her account, helping her salvage her car, manage her phone bills, and settle debts for her children, Buddy and Connor's education. Brian, during a routine exchange of the children, reminded Yvonne of Buddy's upcoming dentist appointment. After Buddy's dental work, Yvonne faced financial reality, with only $4,000 left. Breaking a personal vow, she reluctantly moved into a trailer home, revealing to Brian, "It's $325 a month, plus maintenance fees." Brian casually replied, "Not bad. Is it a single or double wide?" Yvonne, frustrated, retorted, "Doesn't matter, it's a place to live." Brian suggested considering purchase over renting, to which Yvonne responded sharply, not wanting his input. She avoided inquiring about his personal circumstances. The Department of Labor intervened on her behalf with Sigil Recycling, leading to a job offer that brought her a sense of relief, with a schedule that included Tuesdays and Thursdays off. "And I work from 3 until 11, Yvonne declared. "And who's going to watch Delilah while you're at work?" Brian questioned. "And Buddy and Connor get out of school at 3:15, where are they supposed to go?" But it pays $11 an hour," Yvonne complained. Thus, Brian became the main caregiver. On Tuesdays and Thursdays, she was excited to see her children. Brian or Julia would bring Delilah over after she had her breakfast and bath. Then after school, instead of heading to their dad's, Buddy and Connor would walk the 7 blocks from school to Yvonne's trailer. Working at Sigil Recycling was grueling and dirty. Yvonne managed to shed those 15 to 20 pounds she'd been wanting to lose, but it brought her no satisfaction. "Where's my child support?" Yvonne yelled into the phone upon noticing Brian hadn't made the monthly deposit. "You're kidding, right?" Brian retorted. "And, stop yelling, we're not married anymore." "No, I'm not joking around," Yvonne bellowed at the top of her lungs. But Brian had already ended the call. The rare times Yvonne checked her Facebook page, she found numerous friend requests, which were more like calls for casual encounters. Roy Richardson never replied to her messages. Dean hinted at wanting another rendezvous, but she wasn't eager to spoil another evening for a fleeting thrill. She typed a dismissive message and never heard from Dean Danatoro again. When Delilah started kindergarten, Yvonne, Brian, and Julia accompanied her, forming a cheerful procession as she entered the school. Delilah waved goodbye and confidently walked into her classroom, ready to start her new journey as a schoolgirl. Yvonne turned to Julia, curious about her plans now that she wouldn't be looking after Delilah. Julia responded with a smile, detailing her routine of preparing breakfast before heading to school herself. Brian chimed in with pride, noting that Julia was only 20 hours away from becoming a teacher. Yvonne, with a hint of regret, remarked that she could have pursued college if circumstances had been different, directing a sharp comment at Brian. He retorted, highlighting that Yvonne had the opportunity to attend college before her work shift started, but she never pursued it. Instead, Yvonne wallowed in self-pity, often seeking solace in comfort food, letting her health slide. Over time, she neglected her changing reflection and increasing clothing size, choosing to ignore the issue. When a wardrobe malfunction occurred, her doctor recommended a healthier lifestyle instead of surgical options. Yvonne tried a drastic diet, which led to a serious health scare. After this, she had no choice but to adopt a more sustainable approach to her health. Years later, as the high school reunion approached, Yvonne found herself back at her previous size, uninterested in the irony of her situation. She shopped for an outfit, settling on a dress that required careful sitting, and managed to swap shifts to attend the reunion, though with a lack of enthusiasm for the event. "Hey there, don't you look sharp?" Mr. Watson, the friendly elderly man from the trailer across the street, remarked as Yvonne got into her minivan. "Thanks," she responded, offering him a smile, a change from her usual indifference. Upon arriving at the reunion, Yvonne noticed groups making their way to the old gymnasium. Some faces sparked a hint of recognition, while others were strangers to her. As she entered the school, a nostalgic smirk played on her lips. The familiar blend of rubber and old gym odors filled the air. Name: Gladys Erickson greeted her with a smile. Gladys was manning the registration desk at the gym's entrance, just as she had been at the prom 15 years earlier. "It's Yvonne," she reintroduced herself. "Yvonne Roberts, previously Yvonne Davidson." "Oh my goodness," Gladys exclaimed with a burst of recognition. "Look at how much you've changed. Sign in right here." After preparing a name tag for Yvonne and engaging in brief pleasantries, Gladys's attention shifted to someone entering behind Yvonne. Inside the gymnasium, Yvonne blended into the sea of reunion goers, with scattered greetings and ongoing conversations filling the space. Then, her eyes locked on Brian Roberts. She recognized him instantly, even from behind. Beside him stood an elegantly dressed woman, her figure noticeable even from a distance. Yvonne thought, acknowledging Brian's taste, though her attention quickly shifted to the woman's attire and the sparkling rings on her finger, sparking a moment of jealousy. However, Yvonne's concern faded as she reasoned that this woman couldn't be with her Brian, given her marital status. With a mixed sense of curiosity and resolve, she began making her way toward Brian and the small group around him. At the gathering, something must have sparked a reaction. Brian looked back and gave a polite nod to Yvonne, then whispered something to the striking lady beside him, prompting her to glance over as well. Yvonne's temper ignited. Brian had come with their babysitter, Julia Nichols. But then, who was minding the kids at home? And when did Julia transform from the child Yvonne remembered to this elegant young woman? The last memory Yvonne had of her was as an awkward teenager. Had Julia married without her knowing? As a long-standing acquaintance, Yvonne expected at least an invitation to some celebration related to the event. "Hi Yvonne, remember Harry Duper?" Brian introduced calmly as Yvonne approached, her emotions swirling. "This is his wife, Shelley, and here's Julia Roberts." Shelley chimed in excitedly. "I'm thrilled to meet you, Julia Roberts. My dad adores the movie Runaway Bride." "But I'm not that Julia Roberts," Julia replied with a smile. Yvonne felt an urge to flee, yet the cost of her attire rooted her to the spot. She maintained her composure, greeted Harry and Shelley, and mingled. Some attendees recognized her, with one even praising her for looking fit. "Wow, you've really changed," Grace Sampier remarked. "You look fantastic now." Yvonne slowly regained consciousness, half inside and half outside her minivan, the driver's door wide open. Her legs were inside the vehicle, but her upper body lay on the driveway. With a groan, she shielded her eyes from the harsh morning light and maneuvered herself fully onto the driveway. A gasp escaped her as she realized her dress had ridden up. Hastily, she adjusted her clothing and tried to gather herself. One of her shoes was missing, lost somewhere in the vehicle. With effort, she righted her attire and stood up to regain her composure. She remembered leaving the high school reunion, frustrated that there was no alcohol served at the event. So, she headed to Bubba's, a local dive bar known for its icy cold beers and a jukebox that played tunes for just a quarter. Yvonne recalled that during her night out, she didn't spend money on drinks or music. Somehow, glasses of rum and pineapple juice kept appearing before her as she danced the night away with various patrons. Returning home, Yvonne checked her car thoroughly before going inside. Once in her trailer, she felt an urgent need to use the bathroom. Touching her orange hair, she found it was sticky and felt unwell, with no clear memory of the night's events. Her watch, a gift from Brian for their 5th anniversary, indicated it was early morning, and she remembered she had promised to cover a shift that day. After a painful shower, she scolded herself for her state. Throughout the day, she struggled with nausea, attributing it to illness when asked by a coworker. 2 months later, Yvonne was overwhelmed with emotion when she discovered she was pregnant. My comment, did Brian act presumptively? Possibly, however, since we know that she was always thinking about someone else the whole time, we know things that he doesn't, or at least facts not in evidence.